I switch on the first slide. Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for welcoming me. Oh, there's a first slide. Yes, freedom is the topic of this conference, so of course freedom is also the topic of my presentation. And my question is, freedom is always coming with a price. Are we willing to pay the price, and is Germany especially willing to pay the price? And I think in the program you see that I called the presentation Germany's role in Russia's war against Ukraine. But the more I think about it, I think the real name should be Germany's transformation during the war, Russian war against Ukraine. And I hope that you get my point and you get the idea of why I think Germany is not the same Germany as we saw in February this year and as we saw over the past decades, when Germany was one of the closest allies to Russia. And all German leaders and all German foreign ministers were so close and so friendly with the Russians that we could never ever imagine something like what happened now in February could happen. And maybe we were quite naive to not see this. So I will start with an article I wrote on December 3rd last year. And the name of the article was How Russia Plans to Destroy Ukraine. And it was December 3rd. And the reaction from the German elite, I would say, from the intellectuals, were either, you're crazy, this is not going to happen, or it was, you're a warmonger, because you are writing something that should not happen, and as you're writing it, you make it more possible, or more certain. And that was in December, when we had the information from Western intelligence services that Russia was indeed preparing something. Also in December, you saw that the Americans and the British, and I think also the Polish and other Baltic nations, were starting to supply weapons to Ukraine. Well, there was nothing from Germany, nothing. Not a single bullet, and not even an agreement to Estonia to re-transfer something we transferred 30 years ago to them from the East German army. And this was December. Then we had January, and then we had February. And some days before the Russian war actually started in February, I will just tell you that Mr. Scholz, in a background discussion with German journalists, said, he's bluffing. He's bluffing. And it was less than a week before the war started. I can tell you there will be no war. He is putting up the pressure. He wants to achieve something. He wants us to move. So he's bluffing. And I will keep talking to him. And the last evidence before the war that from a German point of view, there could not be any war, was that the German foreign intelligence chief was flying to Kiev on the 23rd of February. And he was there when the war started. And he had no idea the war would start. And his private jet is still there. So they evacuated him via Poland to Germany. But his airplane is still there. It's grounded. And, well, maybe that's the price he paid for his naivety. Because we know that there were several services and several warning signs. But in the German mindset, it was just impossible. It was just impossible. The German narrative of there is no military solution was just also applied to Russia. Because we are just so convinced that there cannot be an Angriffskrieg, as we say. In Germany, that's different from normal war. It's an attack war. So that's what Germany is doing right now, and that's the word we are using. So that's something really different. Still, I'm trying to explain why there is so much criticism of Germany. And that's the first part of my presentation. Maybe I forgot to mention this. So little by little, there were some weapons. So Ukraine was obviously fighting for freedom. And on the 27th, I think, of February, our chancellor had his turning point speech, Zeitenwende, era change, a big word in Germany. We didn't even know this word existed. So Zeitenwende Rede, one word. So he said everything is new, everything changes, and he agreed to send exactly the same weapons as the others were sending. I think 2,000 something Stinger and Javelin and Panzerfaust and so on. So exactly what the others sent. But it took us more than a month for our only parliament to say, yes, maybe we should send something more. I mean, as I said, Estonia was sending the howitzers at the very beginning. We gave the approval then, after it was already too late, to be honest. So Germany needed 1 month to say, maybe we should do this, then another month to agree on the first Gepard. It wasn't sent there, it was just agreed upon. It was sent 5 months later. Then in May, I think the Panzerhaubitze was agreed upon, and now, 2 weeks ago, we finally agreed to send armored vehicles, which will arrive during the next weeks, 50 armored vehicles. So, it went step by step. It was very slow. We never went first. We just went with the others. We just looked what are the others doing. And I will explain this later. And finally, we have this German mantra of no Western tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. And this is something where, and I'm very critical, as you can maybe imagine, towards the German government, but this is something where I have to defend the German government. There are no Western tanks and infantry fighting vehicles in Ukraine so far. And I know that Poland has sent 300 tanks to them. 300 tanks, it's crazy. It's a crazy amount of help. But not a single of their 249 Leopard 2 tanks. And I don't think that Poland has a reason to not support Ukraine. I think that there's rather, like it or not, there's rather an agreement among Western nations. And this agreement is surely not put on the others by Berlin. And you can imagine the rest. There's an agreement to not send Western tanks and infantry fighting vehicles right now. So this thing, the most criticized thing on Germany, why not your tanks, your tanks, your tanks? There are 13 countries in Europe which operate Leopard 2. Not a single one of them sent a single tank to Ukraine. I'm not defending this. I'm just saying this criticism is something you could see, you should see in the wider context. And finally, we had our chancellor shortly ago saying, what we are seeing in Ukraine from the Russian side is the return of imperialism. And he really shows, for a German chancellor, especially for him, the toughest word you can imagine, the worst you can imagine, to describe what's going on there. And you could not hear in his speech, and with this I come to the second slide, anything like, there is no military solution, we need to have dialogue with Russia, what about negotiations? Nothing like this. Because I think the Germany we are having right now is a totally different Germany than the Germany we had in February this year. However, we are having this extremely bad reputation, and maybe we have it for good reason. Because for many years, Germany just had this credo, and we had this ruling narrative that there is no military solution. And the interesting thing and paradox thing is, the more someone implemented a military solution, the German ministers and chancellors answered, but there is no military solution. So they were just contradicting reality. They were just saying the opposite of what was happening in front of their very eyes. We saw the same in Syria, for example, where Russia, since 2015, implemented a military solution in favor of the Syrian regime. And I'm saying this for many years now, it's surely no coincidence that in September 30, 2015, Russia started bombing, and in October 2015, hundreds of thousands of Syrians turned up in Germany. And right now we have 1 million Syrian people in Germany, which is every 20th Syrian. And we have 1 million Ukrainian people in Germany, which is every 42nd Ukrainian living in Germany. Fortunately, this time we react differently. But so far, and you could see the same in Ukraine in 2014 and 2015. What was our answer? Our answer was not to send weapons. Our answer was not to somehow strengthen the Ukrainian army. Some did this in the west of the country. America, Canada, they educated these soldiers at least. I think they should have done much more and should have sent much more weapons. But at least they educated the army and they transformed it into a modern army, which is one of the reasons why we see them winning right now. But for Germany, it was no. The more aggression, the more talk. The more tanks, the more dialogue. And why is this so? So the answer, short answer, many German politicians will give you, it's because of our history. And that's where they stop. Because they hope that everyone understands, oh yeah, your history, right. Your history makes you not believe in military solutions, while a military solution stopped the German reign and the Nazi reign over whole of Europe. So this doesn't make sense. Our history, I would say, teaches us exactly the opposite. It teaches us that it needs military means sometimes to achieve freedom. And from the German perspective, it is, as I said, a paradox maybe. We just think to what did Germany do last time military means, but not what did others do in military means to create freedom and to liberate parts of Europe. Some parts were just liberated 50 years later, unfortunately. We all know this, but at least it was sort of liberation from the Nazis and from the German army back then. So this is the one thing, our history, and I would like to deconstruct this. But still, people would tell you it's our history, it's our history. And the second one is the Ostpolitik. And if any of you is a political scientist, you would say, Ostpolitik, yeah, this was in the 70s by this social democratic and so on. But I think the narrative is much deeper and much wider in our understanding. Very few Germans know what Ostpolitik really is, but you will find exactly the same narrative until February this year in the Christian Democrats, in the Greens, in the FDP, and of course in the right and left-wing extremists who didn't change ever since. And for them, Ostpolitik is something like, we have to engage with the Russians, with the Soviets, with someone there, whatever it is, you know, because also they don't understand that there's no actor like there was in the 70s when we had maybe a successful Ostpolitik. Also, the idea behind this is that we are the ones talking with the Russians, while the others are not. So many Germans, not only politicians, but big parts of the public until February had the idea that we are the mediators. We are not like these crazy people in Washington there, or these Central and Eastern Europeans who for some reasons have a problem with Russia. And we are not like these strange, culturally different, but liking to approach us Russians, well, Putin or whoever. We had the idea that we are in the middle and we have to negotiate and we have to mediate and we are the tool to create a greater peace and dialogue and friendship and harmony in Europe. That was obviously wrong. But this idea was there and the narrative was so strong. And last but not least, we have to talk about, I said here, Russian influence operations, but that's a very wide area. I'm not talking about specific operations, or also specific operations, but how Russia exploited exactly these points I was just talking about. Exploited our history and exploited our role as a mediator, and us trying to be somewhere in the middle and somewhere in the negotiation position. And if you look at the vitas of our politicians, of our leading politicians, not only Merkel, but also our head of state, with this, Mr. Steinmeier, also our last foreign ministers, Mr. Gabriel and Mr. Maas, they were all close friends to the Russian leadership. I mean, real friends, beyond policy. They were really like close to them and happy with them. And this is not because they were bribed. This is not because someone gave them a bag with money and said, okay, this is for you, and now you have to be friendly. No, it's because the Russians were smart enough to exploit our weak points, exploit our narratives, and tell us exactly what we wanted to hear. So we are the moderates. We are the ones between the crazy Lithuanians and them. So we have to mediate there somewhere. And this really worked. So our head of state is not just Mr. Steinmeier. He's not just a friend of Mr. Lavrov, as he at least has been until February, but also an honorary doctor in Yekaterinburg. If you see the others, Mr. Gabriel, who for some reason had dozens of meetings with the Nord Stream leadership, he would sue us as soon as we say he talked about Nord Stream with them. He only talked about security of supply for Ukraine. So I may not say anything else. But these people were so often in Russia and had so many connections with them, also with the city partnerships, for example, and this youth exchange and so on, that it's really, really, yeah, you can really see why this happened. And beyond this, we had concrete examples of the German-Russian Forum, for example, which was also led by a former boss of the Social Democrats. And you could see that these events were co-funded on the one side by German public money, for example, from the German Foreign Ministry, and on the other side from the Gorshakov Foundation, which is an influence think tank and a Kremlin-founded think tank. I think founded in 2010 by Mr. Medvedev on behalf of Mr. Putin, telling him you have to found this. And you find this in so many events, in so many organizations, that there was money in it from the Russians. And again, not money to someone to say, okay, here you go, but money to transport ideas. And the last famous example there was the so-called Climate Foundation to ensure Nord Stream 2. And you remember that this Climate Foundation was 99% founded by Gazprom and funded by Gazprom. But it was about climate, because, you know, Greta and everything, and the German Greens, and we were just all about climate. So they exploited exactly what we were about then, what all of our politicians thought would be good to work on then. And this is just the latest example. If you see how Gazprom and others influenced us and went through our society, from a kindergarten in Berlin to a leisure park in southern Germany to being the main sponsor of one of the biggest German football clubs. Russian state money and state influence was everywhere. Not to bribe anyone, not to create corruption, but to just have a say there and always say, but look what we are doing and you have to understand us, and so on and so on. All this changed. Not in February, but a little earlier, when the Russians just overstretched. They just overstretched. They reacted, it was just too much. Due to journalists in Germany who are very critical towards the government, not only the Russian government, but also the German government, we uncovered a lot of these plots when it comes to, for example, this foundation. Then when we realized they are, I mean, Nord Stream, the company, is telling a parliament in Germany when to talk about what, and is introducing the bills in the parliament. I mean, this was their text. That was absolutely clear for us. And they said, oh yeah, it's Corona, but on this Friday we need a special session because Gazprom wants us to have a special session. So we have to come together and have this foundation there founded. So that was something. The other thing was that there are other official influence networks, which I think is Russian propaganda media. And you know, Berlin is the capital of Russian propaganda in Europe. We have RT, we have Sputnik, we have Redfish, and we have Ropcke, all of them operating from the heart of Germany. And all of them having hundreds and hundreds of employees. But they're overstretched, because they were trying to get a TV channel, and it's just not legal in Germany to have a TV channel as a foreign state entity. So they were trying to get a license from Serbia and broadcasting illegally and so on. And it was just too much. So the Germans stopped them, and right now, thank God, they not even have a homepage to produce their content from. So because it was all abolished. And then, of course, in February, we all know what happened, and I started with this. And I think all this, finally, and that's maybe one of the very, very few good things about the war, is that it opened our eyes, not only from our politicians. You remember maybe Mr. Scholz just 2 years ago was negotiating deals with Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin personally with letters to somehow make Nord Stream come true. It all changed. There are no more talks, and there are no military solutions, and there's no more dialogue. No. Russia, with its actions in Germany and in Ukraine, turned, I think, the German political sphere and also the German public from doves to hawks. And the last thing I will say on this, and then we can go to the Q&A, is that I hear from many that, yeah, but they still have this Nord Stream until very recently, and they still use gas and energy as a weapon. It didn't work. And it didn't work before it was blown up by whoever. Because before the war, there was a minority of Germans, I think 28%, were supporting arms supplies to Ukraine in January. In April, it was 45%. Then the Russians started reducing gas. In June, it was 58%, and now it's 63%. 63% of the Germans support more weapons for Ukraine, despite having no gas and no oil from Russia anymore. And these 63% come down to all the main political parties, so all the 3 government parties as well as the main opposition party. There is no doubt that Germany will keep on supporting Ukraine, will keep sending more weapons, heavier weapons, and I hope, maybe you have to ask somewhere else, but I hope that next year we will also see German tanks from wherever in Ukraine. But what I want to say is that I think there's no way back. This Zeitenwendenrede, it was a real turning point for Germany, for German-Russian relations, and I don't see a way back, because even if we have a change in government now or in a couple of years, it will be parties which are absolutely pro-Ukraine and which see no need to talk to Putin anymore before he is defeated on the battlefield. So now I'm ready for questions.
Thank you very much. Julian Ropcke, Senior Political Editor at Bild. So, as usual, we have questions to come. I'm here to ask you Okay, I see one hand up.
My name is Valentine Soldatenko. I'm from Ukraine. Thank you for your speech. And my question is about one detail, which is really important. Everybody knows that as soon as the country starts creating mobile hospitals near the border, it's a signal that the country is not playing, it's not about threatening, it's about the action. So how the government, it's not only about Germany, but as soon as you mentioned this first thesis at the beginning of your speech about oversleeping. So my question concerns exactly this detail. How this this detail was not taken into consideration, because at the end of January, at the beginning of February, the world saw the pictures of satellites with these mobile hospitals.
Yeah. Well, my answer would be that unfortunately the Germans were listening to the wrong intelligence services, which I think they are still in very close connection to. And they got the information that, yes, we are doing this. It looks like we are preparing war, but what we really want from you is that you put back the NATO borders to 1990-something, and that you have to approach us, you have to do something for us. So they say, yes, we make it look like we are preparing a war, but in reality, you should keep negotiating, because you are the only reasonable ones who are not sending weapons to Ukraine, and you should stay in the middle. So I think German intelligence and government was tricked by this, but I think they were successfully tricked.
Any more questions from the room? Because we are slowly approaching the lunchtime. So one more. Can we do one more question? Yeah, let's do one more question.
Thank you very much. My name is Dragoș. I'm from Romania. It's a very beautiful speech, and thank you for that. It's refreshing and good to see that we have a strong ally here in the heart of Europe. But a very important question arises. We all know that German technology is it's not dependent, but it really needs resources, especially from Russia, considering the prices and the history. We know very high technology in Germany and a very rich in resources land in Russia. And my question would be, is the German people right now prepared to make this change, and are there real alternatives? Because yes, we know at this point in time the German people might be supportive towards Ukraine, but there's a hard winter coming and many more winters to come. And what will the alternatives actually be? Thank you.
Yeah, I think the upcoming winter will be the hardest, because this will be where we have to adapt to the situation, where we have to find new energy resources, where we have to save energy. And you can see this in Berlin already. It's much darker in the evening than it was some weeks ago, and that's not just because it's getting dark earlier. I think you have seen that our economy minister and our chancellor have been a lot to Gulf countries over the past months, and they are begging. They're begging for resources there. And they're not getting much, because they're telling the sheikhs, well, yes, we need your gas, but only for 5 years. And then we don't want your gas anymore. And we want you to not produce gas anymore and sell it to anyone else, which is a strategy which didn't work well so far. At the same time, we are switching off our last nuclear power plants, which is like our fallback. You know, this is like our last security line, to have at least some secure energy. So my personal opinion, and I won't go too deep into this, is that we're not doing enough to rightfully adapt, because we hope for, of course, renewable energies. We want to have more of this, but at the same time, I think we are not fast enough in expanding renewables, all the renewables. So I think we will need more gas from others. We are building LNG terminals right now. We didn't do this for many years because we said, oh, we have cheap Russian gas. Why should we? Why should we? All the others did. And we had these projects 5 years ago, and they were all abolished because we had Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2, and somehow it will work. So it was really, I think, a very, very bad idea. Right now, we are trying to import more gas from Norway, as you know, and the Netherlands, and it works so far. I mean, our Speicher, our
speaker.
Speicher, our containers, our storages. Thank you. Our storages are almost filled, so that's at least something. We managed at least to fill the storages. I'm not sure how long it will last, as there will be no more gas from Russia at all. It looks because I cannot imagine they will use Ukraine or Yamal via Poland anymore. So it's just a fact now. We have to adapt to it, and it's a reality. I mean, right now, the explosion of Nord Stream for me was sort of a relief, because now we don't bet on this anymore. And still, I said this before, and this is my last remark. I think it was Russia, and I hope it was Russia. Because if it was anyone else than Russia, then it was a very, very bad sign of no trust towards the German government. Because we had no idea, no plan. There was no plan B to use Nord Stream 2. There was no plan B. Not in the government, not in the opposition. No one planned to open Nord Stream 2 in the winter, despite it's getting really cold. And it was full of methane, so there was not even gas to use in it. So there was no plan to open it. And we didn't get any gas via Nord Stream 1. So these pipelines were dead anyways. Now they're exploded as well. And I think it was Russia to make us think exactly this. Who doesn't trust us? Who thought we maybe would again turn to Russia in case of emergency? I think we wouldn't have turned to Russia, and I think still that Russia wanted to create this image that someone in Europe or over the sea wanted to make sure we are not turning to Russia. I can promise you, at least for the next years, we are not turning back to Russia.
Thank you very much, Julian. Thank you.
Great applause for Julian Ropcke.